Can you tell us a little bit about what you've got going on in your world and share some very fun stuff?
Well, you're very kind. I'm gobsmacked happy that just last night I got the advance copy of a brand new book I've written. It's called Jack Benny and the Golden Age of American Radio Comedy. I love comedy and I love performers. Apparently I like incomplete media because my research is on movies with no sound or now comedy with no pictures. So I was fascinated by Jack Benny as another entrepreneur in the same way that both the Britons and Mike Zaz were. Benny, one of the greatest comedians of the 20th century, well, I was fascinated by him as an entrepreneur too. Ended up taking something that was sort of given to him and saying, what else can I do with it? In the vaudeville stage, he started out as a violin player at the age, dropped out of school at 16. Was going to make a living playing, fiddling on a violin, playing popular songs. Until one day somebody asked him to tell a joke. He'd been drafted and he was involved in a naval show at the base. And he told a joke and people laughed. He was going, this is cool. So he's a nervous, kind of shy guy, but he determines he comes out on stage holding the violin for dear life and he tells a couple jokes. What he innovated, he was basically copying another innovative comic, but Jack Benny and the guy he was copying, Frank Fay, were some of the first comics who were stand-up comedians. They didn't come out with big nose and funny outfits, kind of like a Charlie Chaplin. They didn't come out with a slapstick to whack somebody upside the bottom, or to tumble on the floor and make noise. Jack Benny stood in a dinner suit, an evening suit. He looked elegant and handsome and young, and he talked in a natural, quiet way, telling sort of individual stories and his take on life to the audience, connecting with them individually. So as I said, it was not about running around on stage or squeaking toys or having a funny nose. This would, in a way, he and Frank Fay were among this new generation of comics who we can trace very much our contemporary stand-up comics to. But that world of vaudeville crashed in the time of the Great Depression. Jack is seeing his livelihood dry up. The theaters are closing. Everybody's losing their income. Life is really hard. The only bright spot in entertainment in 1932 was the radio. Here's a brand new medium, just like motion pictures were in 1896. It was relatively inexpensive, and it reached the public in new ways. If you could afford even the cheapest set, you never had to go to the movies again, which a lot of people did. So he decides to take a leap. It might mean he'd lose status and he's got to start all over in a new medium, but he gets hired for a radio show. Its sponsor was Canada Dry Ginger Ale. He didn't know, and the sponsor didn't know exactly what broadcasting a weekly radio show was about. When he was on the stage and being a comic, he could perfect the 15-minute routine, like a stand-up comic with 15 minutes of their best stuff. But again, he traveled from theater to theater, town to town to town every week. It was a different, like Frank Burton, it was a different audience all the time. You could use the same material with a different audience. When he gets to his first night of his radio show, he gives most of his 15 minutes of work. That's all the jokes he had for the year. He used up the first show. He was due on the next week. He used up his second, within 3 weeks, he had used up his entire career's worth of jokes, and they expected him on the next week. Suddenly he goes, oh no, this is an entirely different medium. I can't perfect 15 minutes of humor. I've got to have fresh jokes every single week. Who can write all that material? He runs out, finds a writer, somebody he'd bought a few jokes from the past, but the genius idea they said, well, other comics are assembling a file of 100,000 jokes, and we'll just start on joke 1 and read our way through them till we get to joke 100,000, and then we'll start over at the beginning again. It'll be 2 ducks walk into a bar. Next week it'll be 2 ministers walk into a bar. It'll be 2. Jack and Harry Kahn, his writers, say, okay, out of desperation, we're going to do something different. And what Jack did was he pulled over to the stationary microphone the guy who led the band. And he pulled the lady who sang the songs. He even pulled the guy who gave the commercial announcement. And he started talking to them. They had never done anything but lead the band give the announcement or sing before. They weren't comics. But he had ways of calming them down and getting them to answer questions and making them his sidekicks. And Jack Benny and Harry Kahn created the germ of the situation comedy, a familiar group of people who are not there necessarily to tell you two ducks walk into a bar kind of jokes, but to make the humor out of the everyday interactions of these various characters. So to do that, eventually Jack Benny had to create a character of his own, and it took about 4 years into the radio show until he creates the character we know of him today, of the 39-year-old cheapskate who can't spend a dime, who when he's given the funniest line of his career, your money or your life, with a burglar putting a gun to his head, and he can't talk for a minute because he's considering what's worth more, his wallet or his life. That was a joke that was 20 years in the making of radio, of build-up, of a character so cheap, so reluctant to spend a dime, as I said, that story just indicates to me that we always think that these successful entertainers had an easy story, that everything went well for him. Jack Benny was fired by his first 3 sponsors. He faced these challenges, such as, oh my God, I've got to go on next week. I have no script. I have no nothing. So of doing things like bringing that stand-up comedy to radio, he could reach out to millions of people and make it sound like he was talking just to them instead of to 1,000 people at the same time. As I said, he created the first sort of workplace situation comedy in a way that only maybe the Larry Sanders Show or Curb Your Enthusiasm of any show in my lifetime has been able to move back and forth between, it's a show about putting on a radio show, but we're all going to use our real names, and sometimes our episodes are going to happen at our house, not putting on the show, but maybe we're going to go on adventures. Maybe we're going to have guest stars who just tell us what terrible people we are. Maybe, so they could break the fourth wall. They could talk about other things they were doing in a way I can't imagine the people on Friends, the sort of breaking out and go, hey, Jen, what are you doing after the show? Going to comb your hair in a different way? He was incredibly creative and inventive. He could face challenges and manage to come up with solutions that would have ended the careers of 5 other people. I really grew to admire him even more as a creative individual, and I tried to tell some of those stories in my book, so you're very kind to let me tell you about it.